This is HOA Craze. The contractor was ready to work, and she was ready to threaten. You are about to get fined for this. Karen screamed that I was not allowed to trim roots near the line, and she would claim I damaged Autumn Ridge Commons Association trees. I stood there with my hands open, trying to keep my breathing even, because losing my temper would only give her ammunition. She was already filming me on her phone, the red record light glowing like a warning. The survey stake I had hammered into the ground that morning was barely 6 inches tall, painted orange at the top, and it sat exactly where the county surveyor told me my property line ran. But Pamela Miller did not care about county records. She tapped her smartwatch twice and said the stake was a hazard and I had to remove it immediately. I told her it was a legal boundary marker and I had every right to place it. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her floral perfume mixed with sweat, and said she was the design review board vice chair and I would follow the rules or face consequences. I asked what rule prohibited a survey stake. She ignored the question and said I was creating a safety issue and she would file a violation notice by end of business today. I pointed out that the fence I was planning to build would sit 3 feet inside my property line, well within the setback requirement listed in the Autumn Ridge Commons Association covenants. She said the setback requirement was 4 feet, not 3, and I was already in violation before I even started construction. I pulled the covenant packet from my back pocket and flipped to the design standards page. The text was clear, 3 feet from the property line for any structure under 6 feet tall. She snatched the packet out of my hands, scanned it for 2 seconds, and said the rules had been updated last year and I was working off an old version. I asked where I could find the updated version. She said it was posted on the resident portal, and if I had attended the annual meeting I would know that. I told her I had attended the annual meeting and no fence setback change was discussed. She said I must have missed that part because she personally led the vote. I asked for a copy of the meeting minutes. She said she did not have to provide me with anything until I submitted a formal records request. A neighbor across the street paused mid-spray with his garden hose and stared at us. The water pooled on his driveway and started running into the gutter. Pamela turned and waved at him like she was greeting an old friend, then turned back to me and lowered her voice. She said I was the reason this neighborhood had problems, that I refused community standards, and she was the reason this neighborhood stays civilized. She said it twice, like a mantra she had practiced in the mirror. I told her I just wanted to build a fence to keep my dog in the yard, and I had done everything by the book. She said the book was not enough, and I needed design approval from the board, which met once a month, and the next meeting was 3 weeks away, and even if I got on the agenda, there was no guarantee they would approve my design, because I had already demonstrated hostility to the association. I asked how placing a survey stake demonstrated hostility. She said it was the attitude, the refusal to consult her first, the assumption that I could just do whatever I wanted without asking permission. I reminded her that I was an accountant who keeps a clean ledger and receipts, and I had followed every step outlined in the covenants. She said the covenants were a baseline, and the board had discretion to impose additional requirements based on aesthetics and community harmony. I asked what additional requirements applied to my fence. She said she would put it in writing after the next board meeting. I asked if I could attend the board meeting to discuss it directly. She said board meetings were executive session only, and homeowners were not allowed unless they were invited to present. She pulled a clipboard from her car and clicked her pen 4 times. The sound cut through the calm, still air and made every word feel louder. She said she was documenting this interaction, and she would recommend the board issue an immediate stop work order and a fine of $250 for the unauthorized stake placement. I told her the stake was not a structure, and it was not unauthorized. She wrote something on the clipboard, shielding it with her hand so I could not see, and said the board would make that determination and I would receive written notice within 5 business days. I asked if I could see what she was writing. She said no, it was official association business and confidential until the board reviewed it. I kept my hands open and my voice calm because the real move was still ahead. She did not know I had already contacted the management company that handled Autumn Ridge Commons Association and asked for a copy of every rule change approved in the last 3 years. She did not know I had a meeting scheduled with an attorney the next morning to review the covenants and confirm my rights. She did not know that the surveyor who placed my property line markers had photographed every stake and logged GPS coordinates and was willing to testify if needed. All she knew was that I was standing in front of her, calm and quiet, and she could not rattle me. She slammed the clipboard against her thigh and said she could put me on the agenda and keep me there. She said it like a threat, like she could trap me in an endless loop of hearings and reviews and appeals until I gave up and moved away. I told her I looked forward to the next board meeting, and I would bring my documentation. She said documentation would not save me from the fact that I had violated community trust. I asked what violation. She said the stake, the attitude, the refusal to work collaboratively. I asked if she had any evidence that the stake violated a specific rule. She said she did not need evidence because the board trusted her judgment. She turned and walked to her car. Halfway there, she stopped, spun around, and said she was calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night and I was required to attend. I asked if I would receive written notice. She said she was giving me verbal notice right now, and if I failed to appear, the board would proceed without me and issue a final ruling. I asked what the ruling would be. She said removal of the stake, a $250 fine, and a mandatory design review before any fence work could begin, with an application fee of $500. I asked if the $500 fee was in the covenants. She said it was a discretionary assessment based on the complexity of the review. I told her I would see her tomorrow night. She got in her car and revved the engine twice before backing out. The neighbor with the hose finally turned off the water and went inside. I stood there looking at the survey stake, a 6-inch piece of wood with an orange cap, and tried to figure out how something so small had triggered such a massive reaction. I went inside and made 3 phone calls. The first was to the management company to confirm whether an emergency board meeting required written notice under New York law. The second was to the county clerk to request a certified copy of my property survey. The third was to my sister in Syracuse to let her know I might need a ride tomorrow because my car was making a noise and I had to pick her up at a strict time and I could not afford any delays. That night, I printed every email I had received from the Autumn Ridge Commons Association in the last 2 years. I highlighted every reference to fence rules, setback requirements, design approvals, and board meeting procedures. I found the original covenant packet I had received when I bought the house and compared it line by line with the version posted on the resident portal. They were identical, no changes, no updates, no new setback requirement. Pamela had lied, and she had done it on camera while my phone was recording in my shirt pocket. The next morning, I met with an attorney named David Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. I showed him the covenant packet, the survey, the emails, and the video. He watched Pamela tap her smartwatch and say the rules had been updated, then he rewound and watched it again. He said she was either confused or deliberately misrepresenting the rules, and either way I had grounds to challenge any fine or enforcement action. He said emergency board meetings in New York required 48 hours written notice unless the homeowner waived the requirement in writing, and verbal notice did not count. He said if the board met tonight and issued a ruling without proper notice, the ruling would be void, and I could sue for attorney fees. I asked if I should attend the meeting anyway. He said yes, because if I did not show up, they would claim I had waived my rights by failing to participate. He said I should bring a witness, record everything, and request a copy of the meeting minutes immediately after the meeting concluded. He said if they refused to provide minutes, that was another violation. He said the $500 design review fee was not listed in the covenants and could not be imposed without a formal amendment and a homeowner vote. He said Pamela was running the design review board like a private police force with no authority, and the board had a fiduciary duty to stop her. I paid him $300 for the consultation and left with a folder full of notes. I had 4 hours until the meeting. I spent 2 of them taking screenshots of the HOA group chat, where Pamela had posted a message the night before saying that one resident refused community standards and the board was taking swift action to protect property values. She did not name me, but 3 people replied asking who it was, and she replied with my address. One person said they had seen me hammering a stake into the ground, and it looked aggressive. Another person said I had a history of doing things without asking permission. A third person said the board should impose the maximum fine to send a message. I took screenshots of every message and backed them up to 3 different cloud accounts. Then I sent a private message to the management company representative assigned to Autumn Ridge Commons Association and asked if the board had filed any formal complaints against me. The rep replied 30 minutes later and said no complaints had been filed, no emergency meeting had been scheduled, and the board did not have authority to call emergency meetings without management company approval. I asked if Pamela had contacted them about a design review fee. The rep said no, and there was no such fee in the governing documents. I forwarded the entire email chain to my attorney. He replied with one sentence, "Bring this to the meeting." At 6:45, I walked into the Autumn Ridge Commons Association clubhouse. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front and 15 folding chairs in rows. Pamela sat at the center of the table with two other board members, a man in his 60s who kept checking his phone, and a woman in her 50s who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Pamela had a stack of papers in front of her and a roll of blue painter tape on the table. I sat in the front row. The neighbor who had been watering his lawn sat 2 rows back. He nodded at me. I nodded back. Pamela called the meeting to order at 7. She said the board had convened to address a serious violation of community standards, and the homeowner in question was present. She looked directly at me and said I had placed an unauthorized boundary marker on association property and refused to remove it when instructed. I raised my hand. She ignored me. She said the board had reviewed the incident and determined that the marker constituted a hazard and a visual blight, and the board was issuing a stop work order and a fine of $250, effective immediately. I stood up and said I had not received written notice of this meeting. Pamela said verbal notice was sufficient for emergency matters. I said New York law required 48 hours written notice for any board action that imposed fines or restrictions. Pamela said this was not a formal hearing, it was an executive session, and I was present as a courtesy. I said executive sessions were for internal board business and could not be used to impose penalties on homeowners. The man checking his phone looked up. The woman who wanted to be anywhere else looked at Pamela. Pamela tapped her smartwatch and said the board had discretion to set its own procedures. I pulled the management company email from my folder and read it out loud. No emergency meeting had been scheduled. No complaints had been filed. The board did not have authority to call meetings without management approval. Pamela said the management company was mistaken and she would follow up with them directly. I said I had a copy of the email chain and I was happy to share it with the entire board. The man checking his phone said he had not been notified of any meeting tonight, and he only showed up because Pamela texted him an hour ago. The woman who wanted to be anywhere else said she thought this was a regular monthly meeting. Pamela said it was a special session, and she had the authority to call it under the emergency provisions of the bylaws. I asked her to cite the specific bylaw. She flipped through the stack of papers in front of her and said it was Section 12.4. I said I had a copy of the bylaws and Section 12.4 addressed snow removal, not emergency meetings. She said I was reading an outdated version. I said the version on the resident portal was dated 6 months ago and matched my copy exactly. She said the board had approved updates that had not been uploaded yet. I said any bylaw amendment required a homeowner vote and written notice 30 days in advance. She said minor procedural updates did not require a vote. The man checking his phone said he had never voted on any procedural updates. The woman who wanted to be anywhere else said she did not remember approving anything about emergency meetings. Pamela said they had approved it by consent during a closed session last month. The man said he did not attend any closed session last month. Pamela said he must have missed it. He said he attended every board meeting and there was no closed session. Pamela said she had notes proving otherwise. I asked if I could see the notes. She said no. I said I had requested meeting minutes for the last 6 months, and the management company confirmed no closed sessions had been held. Pamela said the management company was not responsible for tracking closed sessions. I said New York law required all board meetings to be documented, and homeowners had a right to access minutes within 10 business days. Pamela said I was twisting the law to suit my agenda. I said I was reading the law exactly as written, and I had an attorney on standby to confirm. She said threatening legal action was harassment and grounds for additional fines. The neighbor in the second row raised his hand and said he had seen the whole thing yesterday, and I had not been aggressive or hostile. He said I had placed a small wooden stake, and Pamela had yelled at me for 10 minutes. Pamela said he was not a witness because he was across the street. He said he was 20 feet away, and he heard every word. She said his testimony was irrelevant because he was not an impartial observer. He said he had no relationship with me, and no reason to lie. She said he was clearly biased because he was sitting in the same room as me. I asked the board if they had reviewed any evidence before voting to impose a fine. The man checking his phone said he had not seen any evidence. The woman who wanted to be anywhere else said she had not voted on anything. Pamela said the vote was implicit in their attendance. The man said that was not how voting worked. Pamela said she had the authority to make rulings on behalf of the board in urgent matters. I asked her to cite the bylaw that granted her that authority. She said it was implied by her role as vice chair. I said no such authority was listed in the bylaws. She said I was being deliberately obstructive, and she was recommending the board escalate to a lien against my property. The man checking his phone stood up and said he was not voting for Aline, and this meeting was over. The woman who wanted to be anywhere else said she agreed, and she was leaving. Pamela said they could not leave because the meeting was still in session. The man said there was no meeting because there was no quorum and no proper notice. He walked out. The woman followed him. Pamela sat there with her roll of blue painter tape and her stack of papers and her smartwatch, and she looked at me like I had just burned down her house. She said this was not over. She said she would file a formal complaint with the management company and request an immediate hearing. She said she would recommend the board revoke my access to association amenities until I complied with all outstanding violations. I asked what violations. She said the unauthorized stake, the refusal to attend the design review process, and the disruption of a board meeting. I said I had attended the meeting she called, I had placed a legal survey marker, and I had not applied for design review because I had not started construction. She said intent to violate was enough to justify preventive action. She stood up and threw the roll of blue painter tape at the wall. It bounced off and landed at my feet. She said I was everything wrong with this neighborhood. People like me who think rules do not apply, who question authority, who make her job harder. She said she was the reason this neighborhood stays civilized, and if I wanted to live here, I needed to accept that. She said she would make sure I regretted every single decision that led me to this point. I picked up the roll of tape and set it on the table. I said I would be filing a formal complaint against her for harassment, misrepresentation of HOA rules, and abuse of authority. I said I had video evidence, email evidence, and witness testimony, and I would be forwarding everything to the management company and the New York Attorney General if necessary. She said I was bluffing. I said she would find out. I left the clubhouse and sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to slow my heart rate. My phone buzzed. It was my attorney. He had received my email with the meeting recording and the screenshots. He said I had enough evidence to file a complaint with the management company and request Pamela be removed from the board. He said I should also file a complaint with the county about improper meeting procedures and request a formal investigation. He said if Pamela followed through on her threat to revoke amenities access, that was retaliation and I could sue for damages. I drove home and spent the next 2 hours writing a detailed complaint to the management company. I attached the meeting recording, the email chain, the screenshots of the group chat, and a timeline of every interaction with Pamela. I sent it at 11:43 and copied my attorney. The management company replied at 8 the next morning and said they were launching an investigation and Pamela would be placed on administrative leave from the design review board pending the outcome. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Autumn Ridge Commons Association. It was not from Pamela, it was from the board president, a man named Robert Kellerman, who I had never met. The letter said the board had reviewed my complaint and determined that Pamela had acted outside her authority in multiple instances. The letter said the $250 fine was void, the stop work order was void, and the design review fee was void. The letter said I was free to proceed with my fence project as long as I followed the setback requirements listed in the covenants. The letter said Pamela had been removed from the design review board and would not be involved in any future decisions regarding my property. I called my attorney and read him the letter. He said it was a good outcome, but I should still proceed carefully because Pamela could retaliate in other ways. He said I should document every interaction, keep copies of every communication, and report any harassment immediately. He said if Pamela contacted me directly I should not engage and refer her to the management company. He said if she posted anything about me on social media or the HOA group chat, I should screenshot it and send it to him. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find an email blast sent to every homeowner in Autumn Ridge Commons Association. The subject line was Community Standards Update. The email was unsigned, but the tone was unmistakable. It said one resident had refused to follow design guidelines and had used legal threats to intimidate the board. It said this behavior set a dangerous precedent and undermined the association's ability to maintain property values. It said homeowners who care about the community should attend the next board meeting to voice their support for stronger enforcement policies. I forwarded the email to my attorney and the management company. My attorney said it was defamation and I could sue. The management company said they were investigating the source of the email and it was not sent through official channels. I checked the HOA group chat and found 12 new messages, all discussing the email. Half the people agreed that standards were slipping and the board needed to be tougher. The other half said the email was vague and unfair, and whoever sent it should identify themselves. One person said they knew exactly who the email was about, and they had seen me acting aggressive toward a board member. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my attorney. He said we had enough to file a defamation claim, but it would take time and money, and the outcome was uncertain. He said a better strategy was to let the management company handle it and focus on building my fence. I told him I could not focus on the fence because I had to pick up my sister at a strict time, and Pamela was trying to force a surprise hearing instead. He said if Pamela contacted me about a hearing, I should refuse to attend unless I received proper written notice and he was present. That afternoon, a contractor showed up at my house. He said he was hired by Autumn Ridge Commons Association to inspect a safety hazard on my property. I asked what hazard. He said a boundary marker that was improperly placed and creating a trip risk. I told him the marker was a legal survey stake and there was no safety hazard. He said he had a work order and he needed to complete the inspection. I asked to see the work order. He showed me a printout with no letterhead, no signature, and no date. I told him the work order was invalid and he needed to leave. He said he was just doing his job and if I refused access, he would report it to the association. I called the management company and put them on speaker. The rep said no contractor had been authorized and no inspection had been scheduled. I handed the phone to the contractor. He listened for 30 seconds, then hung up and said there must have been a miscommunication. He got in his truck and left. I took a photo of his license plate and sent it to my attorney. He said someone had sent a vendor to alter something on my property without permission under the excuse of safety, and that was trespassing, and I should file a police report. I filed the report that evening. The officer who took the statement said it sounded like a civil dispute and I should handle it through the HOA. I told him someone had hired a contractor to access my property without my consent. He said unless the contractor caused damage or refused to leave, there was no crime. I asked if impersonating an HOA representative was a crime. He said it depends on the context and I should consult an attorney. I said I already had an attorney, and the attorney told me to file a report. He said the report was filed, and if anything else happened, I should call again. The next morning, my neighbor's dog knocked over one of my survey stakes. The dog was a golden retriever who spent most of his time digging holes and chewing sprinkler heads. I walked over and set the stake back in place. 2 hours later, Pamela showed up at my door and said I had moved the stake on purpose to encroach on association property. I said the dog knocked it over, and I put it back exactly where it had been. She said she had photos proving the stake was in a different position. I said she was welcome to hire a surveyor to verify the placement. She said she did not need a surveyor because she had measured the distance herself using a tape measure, and the stake was 6 inches closer to the sidewalk than it had been yesterday. I asked if she had proof the original position was correct. She said she had marked the position with blue painter tape and the tape was gone, which proved I had tampered with it. I said I had not seen any tape, and the dog probably knocked that over too. She said the dog was a convenient excuse and she was filing a formal complaint for property line manipulation. I told her to do whatever she wanted and closed the door. I called my attorney and told him what happened. He said Pamela was escalating and we needed to go on offense. He said I should file a restraining order to stop her from contacting me directly or coming to my property. He said we should also request a formal investigation into her conduct and ask the board to remove her entirely. I said the board already removed her from the design review committee. He said that was not enough because she was still a board member and she still had access to homeowner information and association resources. If you are enjoying this HOA breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the receipts always win. I filed for a restraining order the next day. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Pamela posted in the HOA group chat that someone had filed a false restraining order against her, and it was a waste of taxpayer resources and an abuse of the legal system. She said the person in question had a history of aggression and dishonesty, and the community should be aware. 3 people asked who it was. She said she could not name them for legal reasons, but they would know who they were. I took screenshots and sent them to my attorney. He said it was witness intimidation and defamation and we should add it to the restraining order petition. He said Pamela was digging herself into a hole, and the more she talked, the worse it would get for her. I asked if the restraining order would actually stop her. He said it would create consequences if she violated it, and most people back off once they realize the court is involved. The day before the hearing, I received a call from a towing company. The dispatcher said my car had been reported as abandoned on association property, and they were authorized to tow it. I said my car was parked in my driveway, and it was not abandoned. She said the work order listed my address and said the vehicle was blocking access to a common area. I asked who placed the work order. She said Autumn Ridge Commons Association. I asked for a name. She said she did not have a name, just an account number. I told her the work order was fraudulent, and if they towed my car I would sue. She said she was just following instructions, and if I had a problem I should take it up with the association. I called the management company, and they said no tow had been authorized. I called the towing company back, and told them to cancel the order. The dispatcher said she would flag it, but the driver was already en route. I went outside and waited. 20 minutes later a tow truck pulled up, and the driver got out. I walked over and said the tow was not authorized. He said he had a work order, and he was doing his job. I said the work order was fake, and the management company confirmed it. He called his dispatcher. She put the management company on a three-way call. The management company rep said no tow had been authorized, and the driver should leave immediately. The driver hung up and started to get back in his truck. Then Pamela pulled up in her car. She got out and walked straight to the driver and said the tow was legitimate and she had filed the work order personally. The driver said his dispatcher told him to leave. Pamela said she was the HOA representative and she was overriding the dispatcher. The driver said he did not work for the HOA. He worked for the towing company, and the towing company told him to leave. Pamela said she would file a complaint with the company if he did not complete the job. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Pamela saw the phone and yelled through the tow truck cab window while dispatch was on speaker. She said I was harassing her and filing false reports and manipulating the system. She said she had proof I was violating multiple HOA rules and the board was preparing a lien against my property. She said the tow was part of a coordinated enforcement action, and if I interfered I would face additional fines. The dispatcher came back on the speaker and said the tow was cancelled, and the driver needed to return to the yard immediately. The driver got in the truck and left. Pamela stood in my driveway and said I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. She said she would make sure I lost access to every association amenity. She said she would recommend the board impose the maximum fine for every violation, real or perceived. She said she would make sure every contractor in Albany knew I was a problem client and refused to work with me. She said she was the reason this neighborhood stays civilized, and I was a threat to everything she had built. I kept recording. I did not say a word. She tapped her smartwatch and said I had 5 minutes to move my car off association property, or she would call the police and report it as trespassing. I said my car was on my property, and I had a survey to prove it. She said the survey was wrong, and she had measurements that proved otherwise. I asked if she was a licensed surveyor. She said she did not need to be, because she had lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and she knew every boundary line by memory. A tow yard clerk leaned out of the truck window and said quietly that the HOA paperwork was always sloppy, and half the time they canceled tows before the driver even arrived. He said he had seen this kind of thing before, and it never ended well for the HOA. He said if I had proof the tow was bogus I should send it to his manager, because the company did not like being used for personal vendettas. Pamela turned and walked back to her car. Halfway there she stopped and yelled that I would regret everything. She got in and slammed the door so hard the car rocked. She sped off and ran a stop sign at the end of the block. I sent the video to my attorney and the management company. My attorney replied in 10 minutes and said the video was evidence of harassment, false reporting, and abuse of authority. He said we should add it to the restraining order petition and file a separate complaint with the towing company. The restraining order hearing was the next morning. Pamela showed up with her own attorney, a young guy in a cheap suit who looked like he had been pulled off another case 5 minutes earlier. The judge asked Pamela if she had contacted me or come to my property after being removed from the design review board. She said she had, but only in her capacity as an HOA board member performing her duties. The judge asked what duties required her to visit my property. She said she was investigating a boundary dispute. The judge asked if the investigation was authorized by the board. She said it was implied by her role. The judge asked to see the board resolution authorizing the investigation. Pamela said there was no formal resolution because it was an urgent matter. The judge asked how she determined it was urgent. She said the survey stake was a safety hazard, and she had a duty to protect the community. The judge asked if anyone had been injured by the stake. She said no, but the potential for injury was high. The judge asked if she had reported the alleged hazard to code enforcement or any government agency. She said she had not because the HOA handled internal safety matters. The judge looked at the video I had submitted. He watched Pamela yell through the tow truck window. He watched her threaten to ruin my business reputation. He watched her claim she had authority to override the towing company dispatcher. He asked her if she had contacted the towing company. She said yes. He asked if she had authorization from the HOA board to order a tow. She said she had implied authority. He asked what that meant. She said the board trusted her judgment. He asked if any other board member was aware of the tow. She said no, because it was an emergency action. The judge granted the restraining order. He said Pamela was prohibited from contacting me directly, coming to my property, or posting about me on social media or the HOA group chat. He said any violation would result in contempt charges. He said the video evidence showed a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority, and he was forwarding a copy to the New York Attorney General for review. Pamela's attorney tried to object. The judge said the objection was noted and overruled. I walked out of the courthouse and called my sister to confirm pickup time. She said she would be ready at 3 and I should not be late because she had a doctor appointment at 4:30. I said I would be there. I had 2 hours. I drove to a hardware store to buy fence posts and concrete mix. I was loading bags into my trunk when Pamela pulled into the parking lot. She parked 3 spaces away and got out with her phone. She started filming me. I ignored her and kept loading. She walked closer and said I was violating the restraining order by being in a public place where she had a right to be. I said the restraining order prohibited her from contacting me, and filming me was contact. She said filming in public was protected speech. I said she was welcome to test that theory in front of the judge. A stranger in the next row stared at her and said she needed to leave people alone. Pamela turned and filmed him too. He said she was crazy and walked away. She turned back to me and said I had poisoned the community against her and she would make sure everyone knew the truth. I closed my trunk and got in my car. She stood in front of my car and refused to move. I honked. She did not move. I honked again. A store employee came out and asked if there was a problem. Pamela said I was harassing her. The employee said she was blocking my car and she needed to move. She said she had a right to stand wherever she wanted. The employee said she was on private property and if she did not move, he would call the police. She moved. I drove to Syracuse and picked up my sister. She asked why I looked stressed. I told her I was dealing with an HOA situation and it was escalating. She said HOAs were a scam and I should move. I said I liked my house and I was not going to let one person drive me out. She said it sounded like more than one person. I said it was mostly one person and the rest were either enablers or too scared to push back. When I got home, there was a letter taped to my front door. It was from the Autumn Ridge Commons Association board. It said the board had received multiple complaints about my conduct, and they were scheduling a formal hearing to determine whether I had violated community standards. The hearing was set for 5 days from now. The letter said failure to attend would result in a default judgment and immediate enforcement action, including fines and a lien against my property. I called my attorney. He said the letter was retaliation, and we should file an emergency motion to block the hearing. He said the board could not hold a hearing without proper notice and a valid complaint, and everything they had received so far was from Pamela, who was under a restraining order and no longer credible. He said if the board proceeded, we could sue for harassment and abuse of process. I asked if the hearing was even legal. He said it depended on whether the board followed its own bylaws, and based on what I had seen so far, they were not. I sent a copy of the letter to the management company and asked if the hearing was authorized. The rep replied the next morning and said no hearing had been approved, and the board did not have authority to schedule hearings without management company coordination. The rep said Pamela had contacted the board president and requested the hearing, but the board president had declined because Pamela was on administrative leave. The rep said it appeared Pamela had sent the letter herself without board approval. I forwarded the email to my attorney and asked what to do next. He said we should file a police report for criminal impersonation and fraud. He said Pamela had impersonated the HOA board and used association letterhead to threaten me with legal action. He said that was a crime in New York and she could face charges. I filed the report that afternoon. The officer who took the statement said it was a clear case of fraud and he would forward it to the district attorney. He said I should also file a complaint with the county clerk because forging official documents was a separate offense. I filed the complaint. The county clerk said they would investigate, and if the letter was forged, they would refer it to the attorney general. I asked how long the investigation would take. The clerk said it could take weeks or months depending on the caseload. I said I did not have months because Pamela was escalating and I needed to stop her now. The clerk said I could file for an emergency injunction to prevent further harassment. I said I already had a restraining order. The clerk said an injunction was broader and could prevent her from using association resources or representing herself as an HOA official. I went back to my attorney and asked about the injunction. He said it was a good idea and we could file it as part of the restraining order case. He said we would need to show that Pamela was causing immediate and irreparable harm, and based on the evidence we had, that would not be hard. He drafted the motion and we filed it the next day. The hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, I started building my fence. I hired a contractor who had worked on 3 other houses in Autumn Ridge Commons and knew the rules. He brought a crew of 4, and they dug post holes along the property line I had marked with survey stakes. Pamela drove by twice that morning and slowed down to stare. The second time she stopped and got out. The contractor told her to leave. She said she was inspecting the work to ensure it complied with association standards. The contractor said she had no authority to inspect anything, and if she did not leave, he would call the police. She left. 10 minutes later, a code enforcement officer showed up. He said he had received a complaint about unpermitted construction. The contractor showed him the permit I had pulled from the city. The officer checked the permit against the fence plan and said everything looked fine. He asked who filed the complaint. Pamela pulled up again and got out. The officer asked if she was the complainant. She said yes. He asked what the violation was. She said the fence was too close to the property line. The officer asked if she had a survey showing the correct property line. She said she did not need a survey because she knew where the line was. The officer asked the contractor if he had a survey. The contractor showed him the certified survey I had received from the county. The officer compared the survey to the fence line and said the fence was 3 feet inside the property line, exactly as required. He told Pamela the complaint was unfounded, and if she filed any more false complaints she could be fined. She said the survey was wrong. The officer said surveys do not lie, and if she had evidence to the contrary, she should hire her own surveyor. She said she did not need to hire anyone because she was right. The officer got in his truck and left. Pamela walked over to the contractor's truck and demanded to see the survey. The contractor handed her the roll. She unrolled it on the hood of a car and stared at it. Her face went from pale to red in about 5 seconds. The survey showed every boundary line, every setback, every easement. It showed the fence line was exactly where I said it was. It showed the survey stakes were placed by a licensed surveyor and certified by the county. It showed that every claim she had made about the property line was wrong. She screamed, not a word, just a raw sound of rage. Then she said the survey had to be fake because it did not match her measurements. The contractor said her measurements did not matter because she was not a surveyor. She said she had used a professional tape measure and followed the association guidelines. The contractor said the association guidelines were irrelevant because property lines were set by the county, not the HOA. She said the county was wrong. The contractor said that was not how property law worked. I pulled out my phone and showed her the sworn neighbor statement, with photos that destroys her timeline. The neighbor who had been watering his lawn had written a statement saying he saw Pamela place the blue painter tape 2 days after I placed the survey stake, not before. He had photos showing the tape was 6 inches away from the stake, proving she had tried to create a false baseline. He had time-stamped photos from his doorbell camera showing Pamela moving the tape twice to make it look like I had moved the stake. Pamela grabbed the phone and tried to delete the photos. The contractor grabbed her wrist and told her to let go. She let go and said I was using fake evidence to frame her. I said the photos were timestamped and backed up to 3 cloud accounts, and I had already shared them with my attorney. She said I was a liar and a fraud. I said she had just tried to destroy evidence in front of witnesses, and that was a crime. The contractor said he saw the whole thing, and he would testify if needed. Pamela turned and ran to her car. She sat there for a full minute, staring at the steering wheel. Then, she drove away. I called my attorney and told him what happened. He said we had enough evidence now to destroy her credibility permanently. He said the neighbor statement, the photos, the video, the email chain, and the fraudulent letter added up to a clear pattern of harassment, abuse of authority, and criminal conduct. He said the injunction hearing would be a formality because no judge would side with her after seeing all of this. The injunction hearing was 3 days later. Pamela did not show up. Her attorney filed a motion to dismiss, saying the case was moot because Pamela had resigned from the HOA board. The judge asked if the resignation was effective. The attorney said it was submitted the day before. The judge asked if Pamela had agreed to stop contacting me or using association resources. The attorney said she had agreed to comply with the restraining order. The judge said the restraining order was not enough because it did not address the use of association letterhead or false complaints to government agencies. The judge granted the injunction. He said Pamela was prohibited from representing herself as an HOA official, using association letterhead, filing complaints on behalf of the association, or contacting any vendor or contractor in connection with my property. He said any violation would result in criminal contempt charges and a referral to the district attorney. He said the evidence showed a pattern of conduct that went beyond harassment and entered the realm of fraud and abuse of process. He said he was forwarding the case to the Attorney General and recommending a formal investigation into HOA governance at Autumn Ridge Commons Association. I walked out of the courthouse and called the tow company owner. I showed him the photos, the neighbor statement, and the video of Pamela trying to override the dispatcher. He said he had suspected the HOA was using his company to settle personal disputes, and this confirmed it. He said he was cutting ties with Autumn Ridge Commons Association immediately, and if they wanted towing services in the future, they would need to go through the management company with proper documentation. He said he was also filing a complaint with the Better Business Bureau because Pamela had damaged his company's reputation by using them for harassment. The management company called me 2 days later and said they were terminating their contract with Autumn Ridge Commons Association unless the board implemented new governance policies and removed Pamela permanently. They said the investigation had revealed multiple instances of Pamela acting without board approval, misrepresenting HOA rules, and using association resources for personal retaliation. They said the board president had tried to defend her, but the other board members voted to accept her resignation and bar her from holding any HOA position in the future. The board president resigned a week later. A special election was called. 3 candidates ran, including the neighbor who had watered his lawn and written the statement. He won by a landslide. His platform was transparency, accountability, and ending the culture of retaliation. His first act as president was to post all board meeting minutes online and create a public complaint process so homeowners could challenge enforcement actions without fear of retaliation. Pamela tried to post in the HOA group chat one more time. She said the new board was compromised and the neighborhood was losing its standards. The group moderator removed the post and replaced it with a correction saying Pamela was no longer a board member and her opinions did not represent the association. 3 people replied asking why she was still in the group. The moderator removed her from the group entirely. I finished my fence 2 weeks later. It was 6 feet tall, cedar planks, stained a deep brown. It sat exactly 3 feet inside my property line, just like the covenants required. The contractor took a photo of the finished product and sent it to me with a note saying it was the cleanest install he had done all year because nobody interfered. The Attorney General opened an investigation into Autumn Ridge Commons Association governance practices. The management company that had enabled Pamela was replaced with a new firm that required board approval for every enforcement action and maintained a public log of all complaints and resolutions. The HOA adopted new bylaws requiring written notice for all meetings, recorded votes for all enforcement actions, and a homeowner appeal process overseen by an independent mediator. Pamela moved out of Autumn Ridge Commons 6 months later. I heard she bought a condo in a building with no HOA. The neighbor who became board president told me she tried to run for the condo board, but was voted down because word had spread about what happened here. He said karma has a way of keeping receipts. I kept my receipts too. Every email, every video, every photo, every statement. I keep them in a folder on my desk, next to the tow release receipt in a sleeve. I do not look at them often, but I know they are there, and if anyone ever tries to pull something like this again, I will be ready. I appreciate you sticking with me, and I will see you next time.